You've talked a lot about how these stories circulate, how they were put together by different translators and editors and collected and reshuffled and reconfigured. All of this is of a piece with world literature. Are the 1001 Nights a kind of paradigmatic work of world literature given their cosmopolitan provenance?
I think so. If world literature is the movement of texts across time and space, if it's the circulation of a work outside of its culture of origin, this is the paradigmatic example. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's one of the most circulated texts, and perhaps after the Bible. Having said that, I kind of wonder, how do we choose what is worldly about the Arabian Nights? Open an anthology of world literature, and you will find the stories that have been selected from the Arabian Nights are the original, authentic stories that embody a certain moment in the history of these stories, right? The original cycle that we were referring to before. However, those stories were not considered world literature or even high literature or canonical literature in the Arabic-speaking world. They may have circulated not quite in this sort of world literature sense. And the stories that did circulate, stories like Aladdin and Ali Baba and Sinbad, are nowhere to be seen because they are not representative or authentic, because they were added in French and they were maybe co-written by the Syrian traveler that I like to talk about, Hannah Diab. It's very interesting how, in a sense, we haven't caught up to these problematic examples. What happens to texts that do exist in this circulation outside of their culture of origin? How do you anthologize that?
Yeah.
Do we put that under French literature, 18th century? That's not how they tend to go. Right. They tend to be misdiagnosed and misplaced in anthologies of world literature.
So there are really kind of two alternative conceptions of world literature at work here. On the one hand, world literature as a kind of collection of typical pieces of literature from various countries.
Exactly.
And then it makes sense to collect perhaps the stories from the original Arabic cycle. But if world literature is a set of texts that circulate, then we should collect the more peripheral, or not the more peripheral, the ones that don't come from the Arabic core.
That's right. Or if they were Arabic, they were very late edition.
Or they were very
The Sleeper and the Waker, which bounces off Shakespeare, and Calderón de la Barca in Life is a Dream. You'd think that would be a more logical inclusion in a world literature anthology. But you know, it was added too late, and the recension was not very canonical, and the manuscript history of the Arabian Nights, so let's just stick with the Portrait and Fillets of Baghdad, which is harder to actually connect to the other texts you might be teaching in a world literature course such as this.
Right. So you're saying, let's bring our conception of the Arabian Nights up to speed with what we're actually practicing when we do world literature.
Exactly. Scholars of Arabic literature complain of what they call Arabian Nights syndrome, by which they mean the sort of over-representation of the Nights in such anthologies, or for that matter, public discourse or popular culture. Over-representation. So we have The Thief of Baghdad framed on Prince Ahmad. We have Aladdin, we have Ali Baba, which have given so many films versions throughout the years. And why not, they would say, well, you know, why not Kamal al-Zaman? Why not The Portrait and the Fillets of Baghdad? Why not the Hunchback, for that matter? So there's this complaint about this Arabian Nights syndrome. And in fact, Roger Allen, who coined this term, he complains about only wanting things which are like the 1001 Nights to represent Arabic literature abroad, as it circulates abroad. So as almost a complaint of a kind of Orientalism or self-fulfilling cycle. And I'm not sure that's fair to the history of the Arabian Nights, because what he's describing is a preference for the fantastical and for the supernatural, which does not necessarily reflect the way the 1001 Nights was actually read in Europe, for example, in the 19th century.
And as you said earlier, actually also, if you look at the 1001 Nights, there are many different kind of stories. Some are more fantastical, some are more popular, but some come out of scholarly traditions. So there's a great variety within them.
I think some of the new scholarship on the 1001 Nights points to the influence of the 1001 Nights on realist writing, on Dickens in the 19th century. It's a reminder that for a lot of European novelists, reading a collection of stories about merchants and cobblers and tailors was an inspiration to write about everyday people. And many of these tales of the 1001 Nights are tales of intrigue, of seduction, of men versus women in a sense. They're not necessarily supernatural tales. And the Gothic and the supernatural, the romantic, they only represent some of the elements, or some of the currents in European literature that borrowed from the 1001 Nights. At least as deep an imprint was made on George Eliot. In fact, George Eliot takes her paradigmatic image of realism. At the beginning of Adam Bede, she says, like the Egyptian sorcerer on his mirror of ink. This is straight out of Edward Ling. We have to remember that a lot of realist writers. She later comes back to Arabian Nights and Daniel Deronda in a very deep way, structuring that novel around Kamal Zaman and Lane's retelling. For a lot of these writers, the Arabian Nights taught them how to do realism. I would resist the suggestion that the Arabian Nights equals Orientalism, equals the irrational or the supernatural.
Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you, Paolo, for coming all the way from Abu Dhabi, from the Middle East, to our studio here in Cambridge to talk to us about the Arabian Nights.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.